So the first thing I'm going to do is unload the wood that I picked up from the lumber yard. Next, I'm going to cut off the ends, the part that I would consider the waste, and I will not be using. One of the sides is already fairly straight, but I'm going to rip this other side just to make it a little bit easier to manage on the jointer. Okay, so I've just taken the board off the jointer, and I've ended up with this flat surface and this little ridge over here on the left. So what I'll do is I'll take a flat board and attach it to this surface, and then I'll flip it over, run it through the planer, then I'll remove that board, flip it back over, run it through the planer again, and then I'll have a board that is flat with an even, consistent thickness.
Take this, stick it on here. I'll stick a few more pieces. You see, I flip it upside down, run this through there like so. So now I'm just going to pull these two pieces apart. Base right here is nice and flat. The other side is the side with a little groove on it. Not sure if you can see that groove. And I'm going to go ahead and do the other boards. And then once I get them all done, then I'll remove that groove.
Of course, wouldn't you know, the dust collector would fill up, so I had to take a few minutes to empty it out. Also grabbed the blower to blow off the planer, some of the garage floor here, and just the dust collector in general. Then I turned it on real quick just to make sure there were no leaks and carried on the way.
Well, I think it's time to go ahead and flip these knives around on this jointer. I went ahead and unplugged it. A pretty good idea of how it's supposed to happen. Actually, I have sort of done this once before. I did. You have to lower this down a little bit. I don't understand why they give you the tools to take off 80% what you need, but not all of what you need. Alright, so come on off of there. There we go. Put it back on there. A little indexing. Carefully rotate it towards you and it will lock in place again. So then you can go ahead and get the next plate here. One thing I'm going to do as I joint the edge of each of these boards is I'm going to go ahead and mark this edge. I'm just going to mark it with an X to let me know that I've already done that side.
And now I'm ripping the opposite side at the table saw. Alright, so now what I'm doing is the board shuffle, as I like to call it. I'm just trying to lay out the boards in some type of pattern so the grain aligns with one another. The idea here is to have it look like one solid piece of wood as opposed to a bunch of boards that are just glued together, which is what it is. So I'm just trying to find the order that makes the most sense here, and once I get that figured out, then I will glue them together in that order. So now I'm cutting what I like to call an alignment slot. What I'll do is cut another strip of wood that's going to go into this groove, and that will help align all the boards together as I glue up the panel. Before I cut the strips out to go in these grooves, I cut a sample piece on the table saw just to make sure I had the setup correct. Now that I know it fits, I can go ahead and cut out the strips. Alright, so now it's time for the glue up. And what I'm doing is I'm taking the strips and putting them in those slots that I cut. And I'm only going to glue up 3 of the boards together at once. I'll wait a little bit, let them dry, and then I'll come back and get the other 2. Same process, put the strips in there, put some glue on there, and then try to get it all clamped up before it dries into place and there's a big gap. So yeah, very stressful, but I did it.
Time to clean up some of this glue, squeeze out. Use this card scraper.
Just flushing up the ends of the top.
I'm getting ready to use a little bit of epoxy. I've got some spots that I need to fill in. I've got one that, this knot right here that nature left me. And I have one that is my fault too. A little bit of this epoxy to drill it down in that gap to kind of seal it and fill it. And then I've also put some tape on here just to keep it from getting too much on the wood around it.
So I made these legs by joining the faces of two boards, applying glue, and clamping them together. Now, what went wrong is when I joined them, obviously I didn't get a nice, clean, flat surface. The problem was I didn't realize that until after I cut the legs out on the bandsaw. Now I just have to fill that void with some epoxy and clean it up. So I'm just using this container of wood putty to trace the roundovers for the corners of this tabletop. Now cut the excess off using the jigsaw and sand to the line. Despite all the steps that I took gluing up the tabletop, there's still some inconsistencies with the boards, so they're not completely flush with one another. To help get things there quicker, I am using the card scraper. After creating a few sample profiles, I'm now cutting the profile on the tabletop and doing some sanding.
So I've gone around the whole thing. I got all sanded here, as you can see.
I'm just cutting the tabletop buttons to length. Once I get them cut to length, I'll change out to the dado stack to carve out the tongues. To do that, I'll remove the blade, the brake, and put in the dado stack brake, install the dado stack, and then I'll put in the throat plate. Once I get that all set up, I'll grab my miter gauge, cut out a slot, and then I'll go ahead and cut the tongues. Once I get the buttons cut out, I'm just going to round over the corners on the spindle sander.
Alright, so I've got all the tabletop buttons in there, and I'm getting ready to put the tabletop on there, square it up, and then I'll screw down all the buttons, and then once I get that done, then I'll anchor it down from the middle. Okay, so I'm underneath the table now. I've got one of the buttons attached. Doing on each of these, I'm marking them about 3/16 of an inch in from the edge. So I wanted to give it just a little bit more room for expansion than I did for to shrink.
So I made a bracket out of a square block of wood, attached it to the ends of the table aprons, and then I ran a screw through the middle into the center of the tabletop. This gives a center point that the tabletop can expand and contract from.
So here's the completed table. I've got it sanded on some blocks there just to kind of level it out because the garage floor here is not very level.
The first step I took in the finishing process was to apply a 1 pound cut of shellac. This was not necessary for this project because the stain was more of an undertone. However, I like to do this when applying stain to prevent blotchiness. I really wasn't sure how much stain I might like showing through in the end, so I just took this as an extra precaution. After applying the shellac, I did some light sanding with 320 grit. Next, I mixed up some translucent dye with denatured alcohol and sprayed it. After applying the stain, I sanded it down a little to expose some bare wood. Next, I applied a Minwax Coastal Gray water-based stain. After applying this, I repeated the process of sanding it down to give it a distressed look. At this point, I'm just trying to build up various colors for distressing later on. Next, I applied just some latex paint. This is Mystic Sea Blue by Valspar. So after I got all the various layers on there, I did do a lot of sanding to get through some of the top layers and show some of the bottom layers.
Finally got this part down to kind of the distressing level that I want it to be at. As you can see, I've gone over with multiple different colors here. Sherwin-Williams, Eder White, Valspar, Mystic Sea is the blue, and then some Minwax Coastal Gray stain, which is on top. Actually, this kind of gray color. And then the base coat down here, this brown, was the translucent dye coffee color. So anyway, a lot of different layers going on here. Lots of putting it on, sanding some down, putting another coat on, maybe even going back with various colors again. Just trying to get a really layered kind of look to it. Now I've got it set up here. I've got my drop cloth set up. About to mix up some lacquer and spray some lacquer on here for the top coat. Alright, so thank you for watching today. Here is the finished product. As you see, we've got some new chairs around the table already. I did not make them, we just bought them. But I do appreciate you watching today. If you like what you saw, please feel free to give me a thumbs up. I'm going to go ahead and subscribe. Like I said, I do plan on putting out more videos, usually about woodworking or woodworking related stuff. If you have any questions, feel free to comment below. Otherwise, I hope you all have a great, blessed day, and I'll see you next time.